Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, good morning from wherever you are. We are super excited to have you with us here today for this webinar on the case for change. My name is Jeff Gothelf, and I am going to introduce you to our panelists in just a second. Our presenters, really, they're far more than panelists. They are presenters. And we are going to kick off our conversation in just a quick second. Hopefully you've had a chance to join us. We're going to get rolling as people come in. We will share the recording with you and your colleagues after the presentation is done in about 58 minutes. So my name is Jeff Gothelf. As I said, greetings to you. I'm based in Barcelona. And one of the reasons that we are having this presentation here today is to talk about The Case for Change, which is the new book by Sonja and Jonathan, who I'll introduce in just a second, from Sense and Respond Press. Sense and Respond Press is a new publishing entity that was co-founded by myself, Josh Seiden, who was my co-author on Lean UX and Sense and Respond, and Vicky Olson, who operates in our editorial capacity. The Case for Change is the third book that will be coming out from our series, with a lot of other titles coming out later this year. And so far, we've published two books, one called Making Progress by Ryan Jacoby, about the 7 responsibilities of the innovation leader, and one by me called Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking, focused on reconciling those processes for teams trying to figure out how to make those play nice together. The purpose of Sense and Respond Press is really to publish short, beautiful, tactical books for busy executives on the topics of business agility, digital transformation, innovation, and product management. And that's the pitch for Sense and Respond Press. We're going to jump right into our presentation today with Jonathan and Sonja. Now, if you don't know Sonja and Jonathan, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then I'm going to let them give their presentation about this particular topic, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussions. Now, throughout this conversation, there is a Q&A panel in the webinar tool itself. So if you've got a question you'd like answered, please type it into the Q&A tool. If you type it into the chat, I may or may not catch it, and I'll try to grab it. So the best place to put it is in the Q&A module in the tool itself. Also, if you have the will, the desire, the proclivity for tweeting, our hashtag is Case for Change today, so please use that hashtag. It gives us a chance to track the conversation and see how that goes. And then finally, we will absolutely be sharing the recording of this webinar with the folks who signed up for it. So if you have to drop off early, or if you joined late, we will have this recording available to you in about a week or less. That's my promise to you, to get to you in about a week or less. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about our presenters today. So we've got Sonja Kresojevic. Sonja, she's a passionate innovation strategist and a cultural change agent with 20 years of experience building products and driving agile and lean transformations inside large companies. She was most recently a senior vice president at Pearson in New York, which is where I met her, and where she led the global product lifecycle award-winning innovation program that was focused on bringing a lean enterprise transformation to Pearson Publishing, which is a big legacy organization, and bringing this kind of modern way of working was no small feat. I'm sure she'll share some of her challenges and successes there as well. Jonathan Bertfield leverages his extensive experience in online media and publishing industries to help companies of all sizes meet their growth potential. He's also got 20 years of experience driving innovation and developing products for companies as diverse as Scholastic, also at Pearson, Sesame Workshop, News Corp, and other early stage publishing, game, and education startups. So what you've got here, folks, is a powerhouse duo of innovators and change agents who have been transforming organizations for a long time. And so what they've got to share with you is how to make the case for that transformation, and how to drive the kind of, or how to spark the kind of momentum that hopefully gets these transformations to stick and drives meaningful change inside these organizations. And so without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to Sonja and Jonathan and let them take you through this presentation. Remember, any questions, please put them in the Q&A module, and we'll get to them immediately after the presentation. Sonja and Jonathan.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for that great introduction. Super excited to be part of the Sense and Respond Press family of books that is coming out, and excited to share with you today some of the stories and the ideas that have motivated us to do this work, and also to write this book together. Sonja and I have been working together for about 4 or 5 years now, and working in different organizations. And what we've started to see emerge has been a real common theme around the challenges for changing how we think, how we operate, how we decide what products to build, how we then build them, and thinking about how that change really stretches way beyond just the area of product development. So a lot of the work that we talk about, we use various labels, and I'm going to go into some of those. We talk about a lot of principles. We'll touch on those as well, and we'll share a couple of stories in one specific area that really helps bring some of this together, as well as the solutions that we've applied in different companies. So as Jeff mentioned, definitely throw some questions in the Q&A area, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation after about 20 minutes or so of Sonja and I presenting. So let's dig in, and one of the things that we see emerging as we're going around working with different companies, and as we're interacting with other consultants and other teams who are operating in this space, see lots of different labels emerging for how to call this new philosophy for how to think about companies differently. And this language sometimes can get in the way, and sometimes it's really important for kind of unifying us. So these are some of the labels that we've started to see. We generally coalesce around lean enterprise, but kind of certainly thinking about things as corporate startups, using Reese's label of startup way, business agility. So all the theme here is that we're talking about applying a set of principles that start at the product level, but really go way beyond. They go to every part of the organization. They're really about a holistic change. So when we talk about making the case for change, we're not just talking about changing individual behavior. We're not just talking about changing how we build 1 or 2 products. We're talking about how the entire organization needs to change, and how challenging that can be to make the case there, to help drive that, to be the evangelists, to be the leaders who are pushing that change. So our goal with the Case for Change book and this conversation is really to appeal to people who are driving that change. So whether their label, their job title is transformation leader or innovation leader, less relevant than the fact that they're really pushing to change the way the organization thinks. We look at companies that are achieving what we think about as the ideals of lean enterprise, of corporate startups, and the activities that they are able to generate really embody these principles. So they're able to move fast. So Zara in the fashion space is able to identify trends, respond to them, and put those products out into the marketplace really quickly. Similarly, Amazon running thousands of experiments all the time on their code. They're listening to customers, and they're applying that, and they're applying the change in terms of how they operate across the entire organization. It's about how they fund products, how they think about how they hire people, how they incentivize their teams and their managers, how they think about their portfolio. And what's running through all of these companies and these ideas that we're talking about is a set of principles. And these principles, they're grounded in Agile thinking, they're grounded in many of the philosophies around lean startup and design thinking, and I'm sure many of you who've touched on those areas will recognize some of these. But what we're saying is these principles need to apply to everybody in the organization. So we don't need to just learn continuously about whether a product is being successful. We need to think about how all of our functions are operating and whether we're doing the best job we can. We need to understand that change is inevitable, so we need to build systems and processes that can embrace that change, embrace that uncertainty. We need to overall be thinking about business agility. We need to be embodying the principles of Agile in every part of the organization. And that's challenging for us as transformation leaders because the change is so large, because the scope of that opportunity is so large. So we then apply the principle of small bets. We're super transparent across the organization, really making sure that we're focused not on just transformation for transformation's sake, but really to deliver outcomes that are connected to the business goals of the organization. So principles are key here. Principles are key in how we think and how we operate, and the labels that we use to apply to the work that we're doing far less important.
So, as Jonathan said, most of large organizations understand that they need to change, but how they go about that change in most of the organization hasn't changed. Often we see efforts that are not holistic. We're not looking at the whole organization and the business goals. We are not measuring those transformation efforts. We are still applying the traditional thinking of let's come up with a business case for transformation. Let's work on this for 3 to 5 years, not taking into consideration that over 3 to 5 years, everything in the organization, from the workforce to who the competitors are to what's happening in the markets, will change. So the world in which we live is not linear anymore. And so we are seeing over 70% of transformation efforts fail in large organizations for a number of reasons, from failure to launch because they're stuck in this diagnostic mode. They can't get approval from the leadership. They can't mobilize the troops or get them excited about the change. Failure to sustain because we start the change, but we don't invest enough and we are not focused on changing the behaviors enough. To failure to scale because we often fund multiple competing efforts. We have seen that at Pearson and other places we have worked. And often we focus just on operating model or what we call digital change, so technology. Leadership often loses interest after a while. So again, we are not measuring the success of transformation enough and not mobilizing the troops and getting them excited about this. When you look at the change efforts, it's obvious that those efforts also need to follow the principles Jonathan just articulated. So if we are aspiring to be the lean enterprise, then obviously the transformation effort needs to follow the same principles. We need to be thinking about what does transformation experiment look like? How quickly can we prove whether a certain aspect of transformation can work in the organization? How do we make it customer-centric, whether it's focused on employees or on the markets and the products? And so the more we focus on embracing those principles in the transformation effort itself and having that mindset of we are here to continuously learn, experiment, prove quickly, so placing small bet, and then based on evidence and data, scale that effort across the organization, the higher likelihood of success of that transformation effort is. And so if you're looking at what those transformation efforts need to look like and what areas of the organization they need to affect, they obviously go beyond just technology and digital, beyond just product delivery, as we would call it. We are looking at how do we connect strategy to the rest of the organization? How do we ensure that what we have in our product portfolio is actually matching our corporate and product strategy? How do we make funding decisions much faster and quicker? How do we become more nimble in terms of not just embracing data, but reacting to the data? How are we more customer-centric? What does need to change in the organization from the mindset and culture perspective? So how we work together in a more cross-functional way? How do we incentivize the employees? How do we embrace entrepreneurship in large organizations so that everyone can come up with idea and we can, see that ideas succeed? And as I said, again, it's not just the principles of the lean enterprise and that ideal model towards which we are working, but transformation itself needs to embrace all the principles we've discussed. And so today we're going to focus on one of the areas which we see a lot of our corporate and big enterprise clients struggle a lot, which is the decision making, right? If you are working with a big organization, you know how difficult it is to make decisions. Decisions are often made in the corridors, or you need to go through 15 committees. So some of the things you're seeing on the screen here are objections we hear from people in large organizations when it comes to, can we move at speed here in order to be competitive? We not only need to get an MVP out there in couple of months or less, we also need to make decisions quickly, because if you need to go through 15 committees, then obviously we can't move at speed. If we can't allocate funding towards new ideas and innovation, then obviously we can't be competitive. So what is the case for making this happen in large organizations? How do we move towards, in decision making, etc. So we're going to share a couple of stories from the book with you today, which really talk about the problem and how significant it is inside these large organizations. So when I was at Pearson, we were working with trying to launch one of our existing products in China, make it better, make it really relevant to the audience that we had, students in English schools in China. And so the team easily embraced lean startup principles. They wrote their hypotheses, they ran experiments. What they quickly found out after testing with customers and users is that a lot of those hypotheses were invalidated. Unfortunately, when they presented the case back to the committee that was making a decision, what they heard back was, well, that's all great, very happy you have learned a lot, but we have a deadline to meet, we have funds that have been allocated, and we need to get this product out there. So all their findings, all the data that was captured, all the learnings were ignored, and the project proceeded as planned.
And there's a theme going through a lot of what we talk about today, which is it's kind of irrelevant the domain that the company is in, the geography that they're working in, the size or the age of the company. We see these themes commonly across all of these organizations. And one which is totally polarizing for us, when we tell this story, we either hear, no, that's totally impossible, or I'm totally familiar with that story. So we've gone where a VP of innovation was presenting a particular business case. It was in the Horizon 3, so kind of transformational innovation they were working on. And they'd been coming back on a repeated basis to the leadership team to get funding. So this is the third time they'd come in. And they presented, did a good job. The data was good and was starting to show promise. There was some good exchanges of ideas. At the end of the meeting, the head of the committee, so essentially the funding team, said that he still wasn't ready to make a decision, and the team needed to come back the following month with more evidence. And kind of the VP of innovation kind of lost his patience a little bit, and he kind of pushed back and said, well, what exactly do you want to see? Right? This has been going on for a while. What is the data that is really going to help drive this forward? And the answer he got was, well, we're not quite sure. And this is actually a quote, we'll know it when we see it. That was what was presented to this VP as the target for them to come back with. So moving the goalpost is a consistent challenge that we see when organizations don't really understand how to make decisions properly.
And so let's talk a little bit about what we see as a solution when it comes to, better data-driven decision-making and really applying the life cycle approach. So one of the first things I want to mention is this idea of searching versus executing, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but we need different rules when we are searching for business models versus when we are executing on known business models, which means we need to treat those ideas differently. We need different evidence when we are presenting data to our committees and decision makers. We need to embrace even different behaviors. And we definitely need to be organized differently. You don't need a big development team while you're still searching for a business model. So if you're on early stages of the life cycle, if you're just exploring the customer need, you're potentially building an MVP and you're testing it with your early adopters, you don't need a huge team, but you need a cross-functional team that's working together to quickly prove what that idea is. On the other side, if you have a mature product in the portfolio, it's really important also how you embrace those behaviors. Is if you're moving from product that's still growing versus product that's in sustained phase, so really your cash cow, the behaviors are different. You're not funding the product that's in sustained phase at the same rate you're funding the product that's in growth phase. When you have a product in a growth phase, you're really focused on what that growth hypothesis is. So the whole team is working towards proving some of those growth hypotheses. So the roadmap needs to be aligned towards that. The data and evidence you are using to measure success for products that are either in grow or sustain is very different from products or ideas that are in early stages. In execution phase, you have the data, you have the P&L already established, you know what your sale rate is, etc. When you are in early stages of the life cycle, you don't have the data. So the data and metrics you use need to be different, and than of Veeam are very specifically different. And one of the concepts that helps products being established and measured differently is this idea of metered funding. So a lot of big corporates go from idea basically straight into growth phase, which means those projects or products are funded on the back of the business case that is always looking mighty impressive on paper and is guaranteeing big returns. And the companies rarely use the concept of metered or seed funding. So the example here that we have established at Pearson and many other corporates since is this idea that we want to invest a little bit to prove an idea, to explore the need with customers, so small amounts of money. If the product fails, if the idea fails, great. We should be celebrating that as an organization because we are saving a lot of money. But if idea succeeds and moves from explore to validate, and we are building the MVP, improving the product with our early adopters, then the team gets additional funding to do that. And it's only at that kind of stage in between validate and grow at that gate that once the product market fit has been established and proven, that the teams get more funds to grow product properly and prove the growth hypothesis, etc. So this fundamentally changes how the organization should be set up. And in order for organizations to work in this manner, the decision-making needs to be decentralized from, executive teams to deeper down in the organization, so closer to product teams, people who understand what the ideas are, who are close to product teams, who can make those day-to-day, I would say, almost funding decisions, because especially in the early stages of the life cycle, decisions are made quickly because those products and ideas can, very quickly move from one stage to another and either proceed or, you have a pivot or failure. And so it's really important that you have those decision makers, as I said, at the right level in the organization, that they are, again, working in a very agile and collaborative way. So, in a cross-functional way, that those committees are not bigger than 3 to 5 people, and that the rules of the game have been established. So as the product team knows what the expectations are of them, because life cycle stage gate criteria has been defined and shared with the team, equally, the decision makers play by the same rules, so they're using the same criteria to actually make decisions. So there are no surprises. So if you're going to a committee, you know what questions you are going to be asked. You know what data and evidence is important and what's important at that particular stage, and not in general, which is how the old-fashioned business case works.
So just to wrap up then, what we're really focused here is in making the case for change. We just talked about a specific dimension of that, which was about decision making, that operates across all of these different areas of the enterprise. We're really applying these principles. We are learning as we go. We're embracing uncertainty. So we're treating the organizational change much the same way that we do the product. So we're really focused on small bets early on. We're working with different parts of the organization. So when we rolled out that life cycle at Pearson, we did that in small parts of the business and got some validation, and then expanded elsewhere. The same principle applies to any aspects of this transformation. These are some of the broader objections that we hear, that we cover in the book, that go beyond the decision-making process, so you can get a sense for the kinds of challenges that we hear on a consistent basis at different organizations, different areas of the world and different domains. The same kinds of themes are emerging that are objections to change. And our goal with the book is to really kind of unpack those and understand what can we do to overcome those objections, and how can we really deliver value as we transform holistically and sustainably across the entire enterprise. This is our contact details if you want to find out more about Spinnaker and the work that we're doing. We run workshops as well as do consulting inside of organizations. If you go to myspinnaker.co, you can find us and find out more about those events. And I'll hand it back over to Jeff, who can talk about the rest of the hour.
Excellent. Nicely done, folks. Lots of good content in there, and some questions starting to come in the Q&A panel. We're going to start answering those questions. I've got a couple questions for you as well. As we're having this discussion, just a quick note, I'll wrap this up again at the end. Our next webinar is on April 24th with Tim Herbig, really talking about how to lead Agile teams when you're not the boss. If you're in product management or you're an engineering lead, how do you lead laterally? And that's what our next webinar is going to be about, srpress.co/April webinar. Anyway, let's keep this up here. We'll talk about it at the end. I'll wrap that up. Got some good questions coming in the Q&A box, and I want to pitch it to you guys. So first question, I really like this question a lot. So you said the failure rate was 70%, right? Prem wants to know, for the 30% who are successful in their transformation journey, what are some habits that help sustain the benefits and continuously improve them as well?
Shall I pick that up, Jonathan? You don't mind? Actually, it's worse than 70%. I should have said that. Of the 30% that is left, only 10% succeed, and that's because the effort is holistic. So I think being holistic in your change is one of the key success criteria. Having an alignment agreed at the leadership level as to why are we transforming, what business outcomes are we trying to drive. So not transforming for transformation's sake, but we are transforming in order to fix X, whatever that is. How are we going to measure success of that transformation, right? What are the data points? What are the KPIs, the evidence that this is successful? How do we prove that this can work, right? So what are the experiments we can run to get some evidence? So Jonathan mentioned when we were rolling out Lifecycle, it wasn't a big bang approach. It was, we're going to develop an MVP, we're going to test it with some product teams, then we're going to test it in one business unit, then we're going to improve it obviously continuously, then we're going to go to a couple more business units, and then only once we have evidence of how it works at scale will we go to scale. But even scale we've done incrementally, right? Building evidence, continually improving all the artifacts, all the thinking, and supporting that with mindset change, with education at different levels in the organization, by building coaching capacity, because even if you're implementing new process, you still need to touch on all the other aspects that we were talking about, from how do you connect this to strategy to how do you actually incentivize people to work in this way? What's in it for them? That's usually the question you always get when you're trying to implement any change. Why would I change? And is this just me, or is it everyone in the organization, right? Because if you have leadership who starts with that premise of, you guys need to change, we are great, and not spearheading that change, then that change effort probably will not succeed as well.
And I'll jump in with one of the totally unproven calculus here, but there's an inverse relationship between the production quality of the binder that presents the transformation program and the value that program will deliver, right? And because generally what we see, and on a number of occasions, we've gone into organizations where we're picking up the pieces after a transformation effort has gone off the rails. And it started by being a transformation effort that was really checking the box. We've hired the right kind of big five consultancy. They've run a great discovery program, and we've gotten a really good binder. Now what do we do? So we really have to focus on incremental change. We have to focus on the measurement that Sonja talked about, and really kind of understanding where we are when we're delivering that value, rather than just locking ourselves in a room and hoping we got it right.
And if I can just add one thing, if that ultimate goal is, lean enterprise, which is adaptable organization that's based on continuous learning, then your transformation needs to be part of that change. Your transformation needs to show how this organization is going to emerge through that process. So how do we do things as series of experiments, series of small bets? How do we learn? How do we share those learnings? How do we openly pivot transformation effort as well, and stand in front of executives and say, those assumptions we made 6 months ago when we presented this binder, they were wrong, but we learned a lot, and as a result, we're going to take a different approach.
So part of the thing you're saying is, hey, set expectations about what this looks like after it's done, and then the other is model the behavior, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah,
terrific. Lots of great questions coming in now, so we're going to keep moving here. This one's a two-parter. I have a sense that I know the answer to the first part, but I'll let you answer it anyway. But the second part I think is really, really interesting, and then how do you assess that? So the two-part question is, have you ever failed with introducing or implementing such an approach? And then the second half of the question is, does it happen that some orgs are just not ready for this at all? And then I'm going to add, how do you know that an organization is ready for this? So have you ever tried it and failed? Or are there some orgs that aren't ready? And then how do you know?
Well, the easy part is yes, we have tried it in organizations and it has failed.
I knew it.
Amazing. But I agree with you. The question about readiness. We talk about this a lot, and we spend probably too much time uncovering the readiness of an organization to embrace the kinds of change that we're talking about. Because it does require a different posture at the start that matures admittedly over time, but it requires that posture, which essentially is a posture of humility, which is saying we as a leadership team are capable of recognizing that we don't know all the answers today, and that the change that is going to emerge, we don't really know what the contours of that look like today. We don't really know exactly what those outcomes will be. And that's a difficult challenge for a lot of leaders who've been incentivized and rewarded and gotten to the positions they are because they always knew the right answers. And here we're saying, set yourself up, much as the way we talk about product teams, the roadmap is going to be a series of questions rather than a series of answers. That's a difficult challenge. So I think kind of on the easiest notion that we grapple with a lot is, what are the signals that an organization is ready? Is how willing are they to set themselves up for a change that they don't know what the end of that journey looks like on day one?
And so what's an indication of that? So you're coming in, whether it's an employee or a consultant or a new team, like how do you assess that, yes, this is a humble org, this is an organization that has the potential and the capacity for learning? What's one sign that this is?
We try to do things, using a concept of, a transformation sprint. So what can we do in a week with a new client, right? Mm-hmm. Can we work with their cross-functional transformation team to build an alignment? Do they have the strategy? Are they clear on, how they're going to measure success of such transformation efforts? If through that discovery we discover that there is no strategy, they're not willing to align as a team on why is this important and how they're going to measure success. If we discover that they have, 7 or 8 competing efforts, transformation efforts going on at the same time, and they want us to just work on one, all of those are signs that organization is not ready. If you go to executive team to present, approach to transformation, and you get questions back or comment back of, well, we just want to be organized as Spotify. That's all we want to do. Can you help us do that? Then they're not looking at holistic change. They're not really ready to change. They just, want to do the easy thing and, check a box and say, we have worked on transformation. It has succeeded or not. Let's move on.
Yeah. There's so many orgs that I run into as well that are looking for the recipe, right? We want to be Spotify. Not even Spotify is doing Spotify anymore, right? They've kind of moved on beyond that. And so, it's a really interesting perspective. Good, thank you. Interesting next question. So all these points make complete sense in the startup or the private sector. The person asking this question says that they're in government now, and the objections are many, and the pace is very, very different. What advice and tactics would you have if you're working on transformation within a government? And in this case, the specific question is municipal government as opposed to federal, right? So any thoughts or experience in the government space, public sector?
Yeah, so I've been doing quite a bit of work through my my work with Lean Startup Company. Been working at the Department of Defense at a couple of the intelligence agencies. And they're early in their transition towards becoming a lean enterprise in the context of the work that they're doing. And we see exactly the same challenges. Some of them are exacerbated, so funding is a huge challenge. They have kind of every single dollar comes from an act of Congress, for example. And so how do you react mid-cycle is it's the same kind of context as how do you react in the middle of a strategic planning cycle when you hear something new, but it's just much harder to overcome. And so kind of one of the things that I've learned over the last 18 months or so working with the Department of Defense, and this is in the US Department of Defense, is that the differences between how they're operating and how corporates are operating are less than the similarities. And many of the strategies are the same. So all of the principles that we've got up on the screen right now apply. One of the keys that we found inside the US government has been finding those early adopters. Because one of the most common critiques has been that will never work here. That's fine, as your question basically said. Right. It's fine for the commercial context, but what about here? So we're looking for those early adopters. Classic definition of that being, they've got a problem, they know they have a problem, and they're doing something about it. Right? They're hacking a solution together. We find those organizations that are essentially feeling the pain of their current constraints so substantially that they're trying to find a way out. We then run early pilots. We find case studies and early wins that we can talk about to the rest of the organization. So the behaviors that I'm just describing are exactly the same as the things that we do inside large enterprises. Just some of the specific dynamics are slightly different around the funding cycles, but the behaviors, the problems, the challenges are very, very similar.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. So next question. I don't know, it's an interesting question. SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework. How do you see SAFe fitting into this kind of lean enterprise transformation picture, if at all?
Well, we had some interesting runnings into SAFe at Pearson. My stand on SAFe or any methodologies, you need to make it relevant to what you're doing inside your organization. So again, it's more about principles and less about let's use a specific framework. And change needs to be holistic. If you can connect change all the way from corporate strategy to product strategy to what your portfolio looks like, to how you make funding decisions, to how your organization reacts, and how does it learn, how is it incentivized, great. I don't care what you call the framework as long as it's working for you as an organization. Yeah. So, I learned very early in my career to stop talking about Agile, for instance, because of the bad name Agile had in the enterprise space. It was either seen as something that you do very scrappy on the side and it's not documented and it's not thought through and so has no strategy, or because of how popular Spotify model got at one point, it became, can you just go and replicate X? Yeah. And so if SAFe is applied very rigidly by the book, I have seen it not done well. And we run into issues of how do you apply life cycle approach of, metered funding and incremental investment, and you put scale on top of it. I think SAFe would work much better in the execution phases of the life cycle, for instance. That was our experience because you're scaling your efforts, you have more stable teams. It would be very hard to apply it for early stage investments where you have, few people working and they may fail tomorrow and you need to reassign resources. And it's much harder to do in that context.
And I'll just build on that very quickly, which is to say any of these methodologies, and SAFe being it's fairly polarizing in different communities, right? Because some people are like, it's a bastardization and it's terrible, and other people are like, but it's totally amazing and it's working for us. The principle that we would say applies here is continuous learning, which is let's not change the entire organization after they've been to one training to apply SAFe globally. Let's try it in a small part of the organization, see what works and what doesn't. Let's see what we have to tweak to make it fit to our culture, and then build on that rather than taking a textbook application and saying it's going to work because we like it and because it works somewhere else. Let's see what works in our organization and integrate it into the other transformation efforts that are happening so that we can build value over time.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting themes I heard, I was at a Lean Startup Amsterdam last week, the conference, and one of the interesting themes I heard over and over and over again there was that the successful companies that, or at least the ones that were holding up as case studies at the moment, all of them rebranded their transformation effort away from things like lean startup and agile and design thinking and, you know, user-centered innovation, customer-driven innovation, whatever it is, right? Because good or bad, like both of you just said, all of those things have baggage that comes with those terms. And so at GE, it was FastWorks, and it was a combination of lean startup and agile and whatever else worked for them, right? And so, you know, one of the tactics here is call it something else, right? And if you cherry pick some safe features and some lean startup features and some design thinking features, cool, whatever, right? But like make it yours so that you move, like you kind of remove the baggage from that, which I thought was a really interesting conversation, kind of a nice kind of tactic to get rid of some of this noise. So
yeah, because, you know, just to add to that, the emphasis is not about let's implement safe or let's implement principles that work inside your organization to fix a business problem. You know, these businesses are being disrupted. They're not growing at the rate they should be growing. They cannot attract talent. They have outdated technology. Those are the problems they're trying to solve. What you want to call your transformation program and what principles you want to use is less relevant, because if you just say, and a lot of clients come to us and say, we want to implement Agile or we want to implement Lean Startup. And again, my answer is, no, you don't. You want to fix a business problem. Let's work together to come up with what that solution looks like.
Yeah.
But you don't want to just implement Lean Startup because that's not the focus of your business.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is kind of come back to the conversation we had before. It's about recipes, right? Just give me this recipe and it'll fix everything, and it won't on its own. Cool. Next question. And folks, by the way, if we don't get to all of the questions before the top of the hour, I will share the rest of the questions with Jonathan and Sonja. And when we send out the link to the video, we'll be happy to either point you towards more answers or put some of the answers in the email itself as well. So next question. How do you influence leaders that their very jobs need to change with their identities and compensation, right? When those jobs are heavily attached to having the answer versus empowering teams to go find the answer, right? Do you have a sense of some best practices and maybe even timeframes for how do you get leaders to kind of move away from this, my identity as the boss is to have the answer to everything, to my identity as the boss is to empower the teams to go find the answer? How do you do that?
I don't think there is a simple solution, and I don't think that, you know, we have found, 100% sure way for this to work. I think it's a journey, and you need to take them on that journey, and you need to learn to speak their language, and you need to understand what is it that it's keeping them awake at night. And you want to start there. And then you want to, start by showing on a smaller, less scary scale how this can work. And by showing some success, you get them excited. Then, you get a bit more funding to go and prove beyond the early adopters and early pilots. You get them more excited. Another tactic that we use successfully is bringing their direct reports on that journey. So, they rely heavily on their leadership teams, every single executive. So, part of the battle is winning hearts and minds of those folks as well. And, their problems are very different from our problems that CEO or CFO have. If you're an MD of a business, you have a very specific problem. So can we help you face some of those problems with the transformation effort, right? And so by working at different levels in the organizations, being very aware that you need to present your case differently and that you really need to prove it differently as well, and then building over time a body of evidence and this momentum, which is not just convincing the leaders, but convincing enough of troops in the organization as you want. So always do a bottom up as you're doing top down, because then you're starting to build a momentum.
Yeah.
And I'll, sorry, Jeff, just to, the key, and Sonja touched on this, but just to emphasize that the key is connecting any of the change to the specific outcomes that they are focused on. So the specific business outcomes, right? So everything that we do when we're starting on this process with organizations is, what is the specific metric that we can look at that the particular area of change that we're going to apply is going to move the needle on? We don't just want to implement Agile, for example. We don't just want to get our teams running experiments. We want to tie that in to a specific goal that they're accountable for.
Yeah.
Right, that they've said as one of their, if they're using OKRs, then great, or if they're using any other kind of framework to talk about what is they're trying to achieve, 2% growth over the next year or 2% growth over the next 4 years. How are you going to do that? What is the specific tactic? How can we tie that to the transformation? So get it something as close as possible to the things that they've declared as the things that they care about.
Yeah, that's spot on and fits in exactly with the experience that I've had. In fact, in the first half of my career, kind of 100 years ago, I was a designer once, and designers always are complaining about, hey, how can I get a seat at the table? And me included, we banged our heads against the wall for years trying to talk to executives about pixels and Fitts law and time on task, and they're like, I don't care about any of this. Tell me how this helps the business, right? And when you can make the thing that you're trying to convince these executives to do strategically relevant to them in language that they understand, in metrics that they care about, hopefully the light. That's your best bet of getting the light goes on. So terrific. I'm going to combine two questions together here because I got the same question twice asked in reverse. You'll see what I mean. So one question is, what constitutes failure for the 70%? In other words, how is that measured? And the other question I got is, for the 30% roughly that succeed, how do you measure success, right? So what are the metrics upon which you're basing failure for transformation versus success for transformation?
So it kind of answers itself. The question has answered itself, right? Because for the most part, the 70%, they have no idea how to identify whether they've succeeded or failed because they haven't set out to measure. So one of the stories that we talk about in the book is essentially the keyword is drift, right? So we've gone from an initial approach to changing the operating model to a new approach to kind of redesigning some of the structures. Some of that is kind of deck chair moving around on the Titanic. Some of it is kind of more substantive. But the point is we're kind of drifting from one change to the next without real clarity on, A, how did the first one go? What did we learn from it? And what should we do next? So kind of a classic sign for that group, which is in the 70% of failure, is they're just moving from one transformation to the effort without any real clarity on why they are and what's happened.
To another, and every year they're basically refocusing more and more on just reducing the cost base because they are not investing in change holistically. So they're not upskilling the workforce. They're not looking into innovation. They're not changing how they make decisions. They are not able to attract talent. If anything, they're losing talent year after year because everyone is leaving. If you are running 3 or 4 reorgs in 5 years in order to save costs, then likelihood by now you have run out of talent, and what you have left in the organization is people that you don't necessarily want anymore. So that's one of the clear signs that you are not running a transformation effort that's aligned to strategy. You don't even have a clear strategy for what the ultimate goal is here. And you're really just focused on savings.
Got it. So let me ask you, let me try to dig into this just a little bit further, because I think this is really interesting. And I think ultimately those of us who work in transformation or trying to drive transformation or even make a case for it, right? All of us at some point or another have to say, and we will know this is working when we see X, Y, and Z. And ideally, those are going to be outcomes, right? Some kind of a change in the behavior of the people who work in the company. Yeah. Particularly starting out, like right off the bat, are there, when you engage with a new client, are there kind of a stock set of behaviors that you're looking to move right off the bat?
Yes and no, right? We have a framework we are using, which, as Jonathan said at the beginning, and I covers everything from changing mindset and culture of the organization to implementing new processes, new decision-making frameworks, etc. But we start by asking them what they're trying to achieve. What are their strategic business goals? We map those first, and then we talk through them around, so if these are the business goals you're trying to achieve, what do you feel your transformation goals should be? And how are we going to measure them? So let's define a set of KPIs that we can use then as our true north. So when we are mapping a roadmap for transformation, when we are talking about experiments, it's in order to start building data set that can prove that we are moving those KPIs. So, if you're not growing and you think that one of the transformation goals should be, building innovation pipeline, right? Then one of the KPIs could be and should be, what's the percentage of the new revenue that's coming from those innovation initiatives, right? So we are not doing innovation theater. We are actually producing new revenue for the company, right? And we have a KPI to measure that. So that would be one example. If you're doing something around employee satisfaction because you want to attract better talent and you want to, educate the troops, and that's one of your goals, and you want to make, cross-functional working much better in the organization, then you can have a KPI around that. You measure customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, whether you use NPS score or any metric that makes sense in that context.
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties with a lot of the change that we're talking about is that it's focused on culture and mindset as much as it's focused on kind of very hard measurable metrics. So when we talk about this idea of continuous learning, I'm always reminded, I heard this story from Barry O'Reilly, one of our good friends. I don't know the actual provenance of this story, but he talks about a team from GM who'd gone back to the Toyota plant 5 years after having been there originally, and they'd implemented a whole bunch of the stuff that the folks from Toyota, including like the cord that hangs down, and they'd implemented. They come back and say they want to share stories, and they go to the factory floor and they say, "Hey, where are those cord things?" And the guys from Toyota are like, "Oh, no, we stopped doing that a while back because it didn't work for us anymore." And they're like, what happened here, right? And I think that the lesson that I take away from that is the mindset of we're never done. We're never going to be done with the cultural shift because we're constantly raising the bar. We're constantly learning what worked and what didn't work. So if you go into an organization 6 months after they've started transformation and you're asking people, so how's it going? And they're like, oh, we're done here. We're done with that. We're ready to go. I think that's a sign that they're not actually on the right path. If you hear, yeah, we've learned some amazing stuff and we're progressing and we're improving as we go, but we've got a long journey ahead of us, that's a real sign of success.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong, was with you, Jonathan. When we were actually bouncing ideas back and forth around this very question was, how do you measure the success of a transformation, right? And, one of the things that always gets me where I get stuck is if you look at sort of the practices that you described in your presentation of a continuously learning responsive organization, right? They're running experiments, they are changing course, they're killing projects, they're changing the nature of their roadmaps, right? If you look at those activities and you measure those activities, to me, they feel a lot like vanity metrics, right? The number of customers we talk to, the number of experiments we've run, the number of projects we've killed. Like, so what? Like, you could kill all your projects, like that. Or you could talk to 1 million customers and still not learn anything, or run 100 experiments, right? And I think I think I learned this from you, Jonathan, is maybe those are vanity metrics, but at the beginning of a transformation, right at the outset, maybe that's okay, right? Let's just get people doing the things. Right? Even if they don't really understand why they're doing it, even if they're not getting the full value of the practice, let's just get them doing the thing, and then kind of start to kind of illustrate the value that they're getting from the thing, or make their practice better.
Yep.
I agree, but I also think that those would never be transformation metrics. We agree with our customers, our clients, right? We need to define proper transformation metrics that are actually measuring success of transformation in terms of moving the business goals. Of course, you're going to start, slow, and you're going to build the momentum, and, that first learning loop is always the hardest. So we may fail in terms of the metrics, but also because the roadmap is going to be adjusted, and means that we may have to adjust how we measure some of the successes as well. But, if the company is not growing, if you have a portfolio that's skewed towards, products that are sustain and retire, then you need to measure whether you're moving that. How many experiments you're running is irrelevant. Are you retiring enough products? How much new investment, how many dollars have you freed so you can invest in innovation would be a good metric, right? Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's excellent, right? And I totally agree with you, right? Like, again, it doesn't feel like a good metric on the one hand. Like, to me, it feels like a vanity metric, right? Oh, we're running experiments, big deal, right? I'm not learning anything. But the question then becomes, is it good enough at the onset? Like you said, the first learning loop, right? Right. How many learning loops can we build in a quarter, right? Like, again, it feels like vanity, but again, it kind of gets people down the right path.
I think if I can just add one thing, because I think it's important, is once you agree those transformation goals and KPIs, you really use it as this is why we are doing this. This is the metric also we are using to prioritize everything. And more importantly, this is how you start to kill vanity transformation projects. So if one of the metrics is, to move the portfolio towards innovation, right? And people come up with, we want to do this, we want to train people on X, or we want to re-platform this. You say, but our metric is we are going to shift investment. Is that project going to help us shift that metric or not? Because if it's not, we are not doing it anymore. And so this is how you start to build alignment as well, and you start to prioritize things. Because there is a lot of confusion in organizations at the beginning. Everyone wants to do something. Everyone thinks their project is the most important. And until you build that alignment around the goals, why are we doing this in the first place? And the organization all aligns around that. So you build a communication plan around it so everyone knows where we're going and why.
Yeah.
You don't have, your investment well spent. You're doing too much and you're not focusing on priorities.
Got it. Excellent. We've got time for one more. I think it's a really good one, and it kind of combines the next two questions together. So question for you guys. Do you think it's better to tell people that they're not doing their transition, their transformation well, or to let them fail and realize it themselves? Right? Because the risk is, at least as stated in this question, right, is that if it fails, there may not be another try, right? There may not be another attempt at this. So is it better to tell people they're doing it wrong, or let them fail and realize it?
So I'll just jump in on this one, which is at the product level, right? When we're driving lean startup behaviors, we always talk about like fast failure. Great. Let's reward that and celebrate that. Slow, epic, super expensive failure. Not so much. That's not something we want to celebrate, right? So I would say the answer to your question, if they're operating on a track where they're going to recognize failure fairly quickly, then great. Let's let them go through that process. Let's let them learn in their own context and in their own way that it wasn't working. If what they're on track for is an 18-month, $5 million and it's do or die kind of save the company, like, let's not wait till that die happens, right? Let's get in there a little bit earlier, right? And for the most part, that's the general nature of transformations that we see are, multi-year, super expensive, kind of big bang initiatives. So if you happen to find an organization, or if you happen to be part of an organization that is running a quick loop of learning to see whether they're going to succeed, then you're already winning, right? That's great. Right. Mm-hmm. But so my short answer is if this is a typical transformation and they're set up for 18 months of a learning loop, right, that's going to be super expensive and super risky, don't let that get too far down the path before you wave the flag.
Yeah.
And again, how you deal with this case is also a learning opportunity, right? The number of times I had to stand in front of a Pearson executive committee and tell them we are changing, we are pivoting. Mm-hmm. And this is why, and this is what we have learned, and this is what we have succeeded in, and this is the approach we're going to take now, was tremendous. And they responded well because I have set that expectation from the start. I never stood in front of them and said, this is the 5-year plan, and this is when you're going to get results. I said, this is the roadmap, a very high-level roadmap and maturity curve, and we are going to take you on a journey, and every few months I'm going to report back what we have learned and what are the successes, and here are the KPIs that we're going to use to measure that success. And they responded really well to that because I used that as a learning opportunity.
Terrific. Sonja, Jonathan, thank you very, very much. This was fantastic. I learned a ton. I hope the folks that attended learned a ton. I've got at least a dozen more questions for you in the Q&A panel, and I will get those to you so you can answer them, hopefully in the email that we send to wrap up and send this. Folks, if you'd like to get in touch or work with Jonathan and Sonja, their information is on the screen right now. Their company is Spinnaker Consulting, and you can just drop them a note at the email addresses on the screen. Our next webinar is on April 24th. It is at this time, same time. It's with Tim Herbig, one of our other Sense and Respond Press authors. This webinar is about leading Agile teams when you're not the boss. So if you're not driving huge transformation, but you're at the product level, how do you drive those teams? If you're a product manager, if you're a designer, if you're an engineering lead, how do you actually lead when you're not the boss? And that's the conversation we're going to have with Tim. If you want to sign up, it's srpress.co/April webinar. We will get the video out to you within the next week. So please keep an eye out for that. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you all have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. Sonja, Jonathan, thanks again. And we'll see you all very soon. Okay?
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care, everybody.